Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Hess. I work for DuPage County Juvenile Probation, and I'm also one of the co-chairs for the DuPage County Prevention Leadership Team, which is hosting this morning's panel discussion. On behalf of my co-chair, Angela Anselm from the Illinois State Police, and our coalition coordinator, Jordan Esser from the DuPage County Health Department, thank you for joining us this morning to discuss recreational marijuana impacts in DuPage County. The PLT is a county-wide community coalition working on substance use prevention and mental wellness for DuPage County youth. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, the top three substances we are working to address locally are marijuana, alcohol, and tobacco/vaping. So these substances were identified as most prevalent locally through a self-report survey administered to youth in DuPage County. So we will share more of this data at the end of today's panel discussion. Members of the PLT are happy to further discuss this data directly with anyone who might be interested. So talking a little bit about the local impact. Today's panel discussion will focus on the local and national impact of recreational marijuana on our communities and our youth. So in 2020, Illinois became the 11th state to legalize the adult use of recreational marijuana. So leaving it up to local municipalities to decide if they would allow marijuana-related businesses to operate in their towns. To date, DuPage County has 9 operating marijuana dispensaries in 7 towns across our county. In addition to the 7 towns who currently allow the dispensaries to operate, another 10 towns in DuPage County have passed local ordinances allowing dispensaries. So that means more than likely we'll see more dispensaries popping up throughout the county as time goes on. This map shows the potential for marijuana-related businesses in DuPage County. So if all these towns ended up having dispensaries set up shop, that would cover about 54% of our county. So expanding the marijuana industry in DuPage County is concerning. Available data shows that youth who live near a dispensary and who view ads for that business are more likely to use marijuana. As more communities consider allowing marijuana businesses into their community, our coalition wants to highlight the existing and potential impacts of expanding marijuana industry in DuPage County and those impacts specifically on our youth. And we hope to accomplish that during today's panel. Today, we will hear from expert panelists who can speak firsthand to the local and national impacts of recreational marijuana legalization. Please put any questions you may have into the chat down below, and we will attempt to answer those in real time. For any questions we're not able to get to in real time, there will be an opportunity for additional Q&A at the end of today's panel discussion. Our first speaker today is Ed Shamilia. Ed is the coordinator of the National Marijuana Initiative and travels the country educating local communities on the impacts of marijuana legalization. We are so fortunate to have Ed joining us today. Thank you for being here, Ed. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. It's my honor to be here. Let me see if I can share a screen here and we'll get rolling. All right. All right, here we go. All right, well, thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak with you all today. As you've already heard, my name is Ed Shamilia. I am the national coordinator for Nmi, and Nmi is one of the 3 national initiatives that support our 33 HIDAs across the country. And as you all know, you have the Chicago HIDA, and you all are in your second year in, or 2 years into the legalization of THC commercially. And I noticed, you know, I don't refer to this as recreational marijuana. And I stopped referring to this as recreational marijuana several years ago. That's an industry term that connotes, in my mind, something that's very not only pleasing and beneficial to the body and the mind, but this is not the case. This is nothing more than the commercialization of THC. And we've got to stop referring to this as recreational marijuana, because I don't know about you folks in Illinois, but us dumb hillbillies in Kentucky do not consider getting high as a Georgia pine recreation. When we start talking about recreational aspects, we start talking about hunting, hiking, biking, boating, all of those things that actually may have some benefit, not only to the mind or body. and definitely getting impaired is not my idea of recreation. Might be to some folks, but it definitely isn't mine. So what we're going to try to accomplish in the 45 minutes that I've allotted today is kind of give you an overview of what's happening in this country with respect to the commercialization of THC. I want to start out at first looking at some legislation at the federal level that may impact what we're discussing. I also want to talk about some of the public health, public safety, what we call common issues, common concerns that we see across the country. And I'm going to tell you this right off the bat, that the 37 states that have medicalized, the 17 states that have commercialized THC, not a one has done an effective job at mitigating the unintended consequences of legalization. Not one, including your state. No matter how well-intended a legislative body is, whether they be at the local level or at the state level, nobody has done an effective job at limiting or mitigating these, I call them unintended consequences, but I'm going to say in some cases, they're very much intended by the industry. And we'll speak to that a little later on. So let's go ahead and get started here. And what I want to do is kind of give you an overview of federal legislation, because it's significant. There are the Safe Banking Act that you may or may not be aware of. This is critical to the industry because right now, because marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance, they do not have access to the banking industry, and that's critical for a number of reasons. That Safe Banking Act continues to pass the House. It's sitting over at the Senate, 180 bipartisan co-sponsors in the House. In addition to that, we have 80 other bills either in committee or in various forms of consideration that are all favorable to the cannabis industry. But I want to touch on two other acts. The MORE Act, Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment Expungement Act, came out of committee last November as 1 of 9 referrals. But the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act is the one that everybody's talking about. It's the act that Senator Schumer and Senator Booker have drafted. And essentially, I think everything's going to be predicated on what happens this fall at the federal election, because this is basically what the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act does. It basically legalizes marijuana at the federal level, removes it from the Controlled Substance Act. And the interesting part of this, it has absolutely no public health, public safety guardrails or regulation. In essence, this act is nothing more than federal taxation. And that's all I can say about it, because they intend to tax at production and distribution. It also gives the industry full access to institutional investors, even circumvents, if the Safe Banking Act doesn't pass, this will circumvent that. But it fully legalizes all marijuana products, including high potency products. And this is one thing we need to understand. Nobody has done anything to regulate what I consider the critical core component that we're dealing with, and the component is driving all of the other discussion, and that's high potency marijuana. And this does nothing to regulate that. And nobody in this country is doing anything to regulate potency at all. And I'm sure Jen will touch on that. It does nothing to establish standards for roadside impairment. And as you know, marijuana continues to play an increasing role in automobile crashes and fatalities. And I'm sure she'll touch on that. So these are two significant, along with some other pieces of legislation, are sitting on the Hill. And I think what you also need to understand is that when this whole movement started back in the late 70s, you had 3 principal groups that were driving this discussion: the Drug Policy Alliance, the Marijuana Policy Project, and NORML. And they were the principal funders. But what we have now, working in conjunction and sometimes competing with these 3, is the industry, a powerful, money-rich industry. When you look at what the industry itself says, when you look at their trade pubs, this is anywhere from a $25 to $30 billion a year quote, legal industry in this country. And they have a lot of influence, not only in state houses, but they also have it on the Hill too. So you need to pay attention to what's happening federally, because this could change this whole discussion. Basically, if we remove it from the schedule, then essentially what the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act does is basically lets the state do as they are doing now, regulating it. And as I already alluded to, that has not worked out well, as we've seen, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. This kind of gives you a snapshot of where we are. When you look at where these states are with respect to legalization, either medically or recreationally, here you are. If you're a dark green state, you're also medical and rec. When you start looking at this movement and how it transpired from the decriminalization to the medicalization to the commercialization of THC, the states to the west there, you saw the evolution. It took about 15 years from once the state medicalized till they actually commercialized THC. The phase two, the states, some of the East Coast states, that next phase was about a 3 to 5 year step. The last phase is from the time you medicalize to commercialize THC is about 1 to 2 years. And then you had South Dakota, and 2020 went from nothing through ballot initiatives and constitutional amendment to both medical and commercial THC on one Tuesday in November. In South Dakota, they're moving with their medical provision, but the Supreme Court has thrown out the constitutional amendment on commercial THC. Basically, the reason being the South Dakota Constitution only allows for one issue to be on a ballot, and the authors mistakenly put 2 separate issues with respect to commercial THC on there. So on a technicality, they tossed it. So this kind of gives you a look at where we are. Then you throw this in, hemp, and I'm not even going to touch on hemp this year because that's a whole nother nightmare. 47 states allow commercial hemp production, and you talk about convoluting an already convoluted process. This is all hemp has done and will continue to do. So it doesn't really matter where you are. It also, hemp affords outdoor marijuana production under the guise of an agricultural commodity, even in a state that allows medical and commercial THC. And as we've seen in my state, most of the individuals that I was trying to send to prison as illicit marijuana producers are now legitimate hemp producers in Kentucky. It's astounding, but that's a whole nother presentation there. Let's talk about some of the common issues and common concerns. And we see these uniformly. And again, as I said, it doesn't really matter how well intended your legislative body is. These are the same common issues, common concerns we see in every state that is legalized marijuana, either medically or commercially. When you start talking about public health, and I'm going to do a deeper dumpster dive in potency because I think it's so critical to understand how marijuana has evolved in this country since Colorado did what it did in 2012, and the explosion of potency and all the ancillary issues that are a result of high potency marijuana. And you start looking at usage rates. We'll talk a little bit about that. I know the next speaker is probably going to hit that a little harder than I am. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to dive too much into that, but it is a concern, particularly when you look at initiates in this country. Cannabis use disorder rising, and the prevalence of THC-induced psychosis that we're seeing across this country because of high potency marijuana. Public safety issues. I know Jennifer will talk about impaired driving, and I know that you've done such a great job that you all have eradicated the black market in Illinois, and that's not an issue with illicit grows still being, illicit marijuana still being grown, circumvent taxation. So I know you've done a fine job there, and you're not diverting any marijuana because you've done such a significant job. If you can get the sarcasm there, because my former agency still continues to stop a lot of folks coming from Illinois with bringing marijuana into Kentucky and their interdiction stop. So you all are diverting, and I wish you all quit sending that crap to my state. So I'd appreciate it. And we'll talk a little bit about taxation and the panacea that it is and give you a little bit about product awareness. But again, we're going to do a quick look at a lot of this stuff for the sake of time here. Let's talk a little bit about potency, because I think if you don't remember anything, you need to understand how this drug has evolved and what has happened with respect to THC and the evolution of THC in this country. And again, and when I started in law enforcement in 1979, and I'm a 60s and 70s child, and went to high school in the early 70s. And if the marijuana that was around then was the same marijuana that was today, I would not even be here talking to you, wasting your time talking about what I would consider, unless you were in a vulnerable group, and that's a youngsters without the fully developed brain. It was relatively benign, for all intent, a pretty harmless substance unless you were a young person. But that's not the case with today's marijuana. When you look at this from a public health issue, the potency of THC in raw marijuana is at historic highs. And you kind of give you an idea of how this has evolved. When you start going back to 95 and you look at where the average potency or I would say high grade marijuana was in 1995. I understand that we had nothing until 1996 when California did what they did with Prop 215. Really high grade marijuana, 4%, it was some really fine stuff. I mean, if you could get a hold of raw plant material that you could smoke at 4%, you really had some premium marijuana. Hash at 6 or 8% with some really high quality hash oil. And then you look at that in 2014, you look at the averages for on the vine flower, 12% was some really good marijuana. In understanding that Colorado did what they did in 12, turned on in 13. And then I think it's really interesting in 2014, High Times in their December publication said that from a botanical standpoint, it was impossible to grow marijuana that would exceed 30% on the vine. Well, Colorado did that in 2014. And we regularly see potencies in the range of anywhere from 23 to close to 40% on a regularity. The highest that I'm talking about we, Nmi, have sent to the University of Mississippi on commercial THC for testing, the highest that we've tested is at 36.5% THC, and that's in the raw flower. From that, you concentrate. And to give you an idea why that's significant, because when you look at market share and you look at items that are being sold across the commercial THC states here, it is not the raw flower that is driving market share. In fact, less than 30% of the sales are of the raw flower. That would be the what you would actually roll and smoke, the tradition of the old joint, the Cheech and Chong in the van smoking a fat one. That's less than 30% of the market share. Over 70% of market share in just about every one of these states is concentrated marijuana. That is extracted THC from the raw flower, and it's infused in about every product that is imaginable. And I'll show you some of those later on. Even to the point now, in the industry's isolated THCA, and it's reported at 99%. When you start looking at why this is significant, and you look at it historically, what our breeders have done in this country, and if you understand CBDs and its role is basically CBD is an antagonist to THC, and if you got a molecular ratio that's basically close to 1-to-1, I don't care how fat your joint is or how long it is, you're not going to get high. But what our growers have done in the last 30 years is basically bred CBD out of marijuana to the point that it's virtually non-existent. The highest CBD level that we have tested at Nmi with the University of Mississippi, the highest, and this is just 0.4%. So then you couple that with THC levels that are going through the roof, it is no wonder that this is a significant problem here. Kind of give you a little snapshot of how this has evolved, and just kind of is a visual reference here. But I think it's important to understand that when you look at the raw plant material and you look at 30%, 36 plus over 40%, then you're concentrating, and here is where we're deriving these high potency products. When you're getting the extracts that you can put in edible products, that you can put in vaping devices, that you can do a dab. It's absolutely astounding. And it's all being driven by the consumer. And actually what's important to understand too, this is the most profitable products for the industry. These are the most expensive products. And it's only natural that they would drive that toward market share. When the consumer's demanding it, the industry's providing it, it's profitable to the industry. And that's why you're seeing the breakup that we're seeing. It doesn't matter whether you look at Colorado, you look at Oregon, you look at Washington, you look at Michigan, you look at Massachusetts, and you look at the product breakdown with respect to what's being sold. You still see that ratio about 70% concentrated product to about 30% or less raw biomass products that are being sold. So it's astounding that we have a marijuana that's available. And when you understand when our young people are initiated and understand that vaping is the principal delivery device for our young people, and they're not initiating at the marijuana that was around when I was a kid, 2 or 3%. They're initiating on based what their pocketbook can, afford, anywhere from 30 to 70 to 80% through vaping devices. It is the principal primary delivery device of choice with our young people, our high school kids, principally because of the stealthiness of this device. So here we are. This gives you an idea. And if you look at the THCA on the right, the beauty of THCA crystalline is that you can hit it with a standard NIC test. It's not going to do anything. Actually, when you're starting to figure out the formula for potency, the THCA number is actually more critical than the Delta 9 number, because what's important to understand about THCA is it converts to THC when it hits an ignition source. So a police officer stops somebody with this in their pocket, hit it with a NIC test, is not going to do anything until you hit it to a heat source. The industry says it's anywhere at 99% and above. I don't know how you can get above 100%, but here you are. This is where we are with respect to potency, and understand that the whole body of research about the harms to the developing brain and what our young people are using, all that research has been done in about the 8 to 12% range. So basically what I'm telling you is we have no idea from a research perspective exactly what today's marijuana is doing to our most vulnerable subset of users, and that's our young people in this country. And that should really alarm us all. And you look at potency and you look at concentrates. Everybody used to refer to 420 that day at 4:20 in the afternoon on April the 20th, the holiest of holy days. Well, that's been replaced by 710, oil upside down and backwards. I can guarantee you can go into any high school in Illinois and they know all about what 710 means. They all know about concentrates. They know about dabbing. And they all are very much aware about vaping devices. And you look at your SROs and talk to them and look at the plethora of vaping devices that are being sold. And I'll show you some examples on the products there that are designed to look like common items that school kids would have, that are actually vaping devices, i.e. highlighters and what have you. So it just astounds my mind how adept the industry is getting at developing products that have high potency THC. And the idea, and the homework is to go to YouTube and just put in their search dabbing hash oil, and look at this and listen. More importantly, listen to what these people are talking about, the experience they're getting from dabbing, and that's just it. When you start talking about dab, why do they call it a dab? Literally, all you got to do is take what little you could put on the head of the pin here, touch it to an ignition source, and then take it in. And as they say here, you can get cosmically baked here. So unbelievable. So what are we talking about? We really have no long-term research to the effects of high potency, but we still continue to enact public health, public safety, public policy decisions that are absent of data and research. It's absolutely astounding. And, all we've heard during COVID, that everything that we've dealt with, all of these restrictions, whether they be masking, whether they be distancing, whether they be size restrictions, everything was grounded in the science about trying to curtail this horrible disease that we've dealt with for the last 2 years. But it amazes me that we continue to enact public health and public policy decisions concerning marijuana that are completely void of science, research, and data. Absolutely astounding. So why is that the case? Well, it's the case that that's what the consumer is demanding. Absolutely what they're demanding, like alcohol. And what you really need to understand, the comparison that a lot of people make, well, there's really no different than alcohol. Absolutely no different than alcohol. And you cannot compare the joint to the drink. If you want to compare alcohol and marijuana, you need to compare the bottle to the joint. And because that's where the similarities exist. There's not the drink, the can of beer or the glass of wine. It is absolutely the joint to the entire bottle. And that's the way you have to think of this substance. And I guess the question I'll ask you is, does the reward justify the risk? What we're seeing here, and Dale and I, my partner, always say, is there anything good come out of legalization? And I will absolutely tell you there is something good to come out of legalization, and that's research. More and more research is being done on marijuana today than ever. The downside to that, we're still several years away from getting definitive results. And I guess I'll ask you the question again, should we just hit pause? Should we wait? Should we let science catch up to where we are here with respect to where today's marijuana is and what are not only the beneficial components from a medical standpoint, but also what are the risks that we're not actually talking about today? So we need to be thinking about that too. And I want to throw this out here. I ask you, how many of you have seen this report? And more importantly, how many of you read this? This was released this past fall by the Chicago HIDA, and it's the impact of legalization in Illinois. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you should do so. There is a lot of pertinent information in there contained within this report, some of which I'll discuss in a few minutes, but it's on our website too. I'll give you a link to it at the end of this presentation. But if you haven't taken a look at this report, you should, by all means. The Chicago HIDA did a pretty good job of not only laying out where you are, but they also show some data gaps here and some of the things that you all need to be considering as you move forward. Like I say, you're only 2 years into this. And as Jordan and I were talking about, earlier, you are, unfortunately, the benefactors of all the experience of all the other states. So you started out where they are today, but your industry just doesn't have the fiscal wherewithal that the other states that have been doing this for 6-7 years have. So you haven't seen I won't say the worst, but yeah, you haven't seen the worst of what's to come yet. So take a look at this report if you haven't. And let's talk a little bit about usage rates. And again, this is the capital of Denver a few years ago on 420. And this is a lot of sick folks here. And that's not fog air, that's smoke. April 20th at 420 in the afternoon, a lot of folks getting high. So let's talk a little bit about usage rates. And I'm going to just go through this pretty quickly for the sake of time here, but we're going to look at SAMHSA data. It's actually the gold standard, and current use rates is defined as having used marijuana at least once in the last 30 years, and they separate it by age group. So let's kind of take a look here, and this kind of gives you an idea of past marijuana use in this country. And this, when you take a look at usage rates here, and it gives you a 16 to 19 look. If you look at the age group, the 18 to 25 by percent of use are the highest users. The old folks 26 and above are the second fastest growing demographic. And if you look within that group, it's 55 and above that are using at alarming rates. But I think this should be concerning that we're starting, after seeing a couple of years of decline in 12 to 17-year-olds, we're starting to see an uptick. When you look at 18 to 25s, these are our college age kids. These are the kids that are entering the workforce, and they are using at alarming rates. You look at the state of Vermont, almost 40% in that age group admit to using marijuana at least once in the past month. 4 out of 10 Vermont in this age group are using. So, that is concerning. And again, these are the folks that are entering into the workforce, or college age kids, but more importantly, these are the kids that don't have that fully developed brain. That that area in the frontal lobe that executive function, decision making, that it's not there yet. And these are the folks that are using marijuana at astronomical levels. So where do you all pan out? Here gives you a snapshot here. The line at the top is 12 and above, and that's all age groups. And the other groups kind of show you where you're at. The dark blue line is the 12 to 17-year-olds, a little down tick, but the other two age groups are going up. I'm sure the other speakers will touch on this, but I can tell you this is always the first casualty when any state either medicalizes or commercializes THC. You start to see usage rates in all three age categories go on. And why is that the case? It's quite simple. Basically what we've done in this country ever since this movement started in the 70s is we've started to, the perception of harm and risk is basically been thrown out the door. When we talk about normalizing these substances with our young people, that's exactly what we've done. And I'm astounded, it's folks that look and say, how is it that young people get tobacco cessation, but they do not understand marijuana? And you have to understand it's a generational thing. I grew up with the Marlboro Man, the Virginia Slims girl. Tobacco advertisement was everywhere. Tobacco use was everywhere. When you think about a young person that actually was born 2000 on, all they've ever known is marijuana is medicine. Now, quote unquote, it's recreational. They have the mindset that it's safer than alcohol. It's absolutely astounding how we have marginalized marijuana and the harms of marijuana in this country. When you throw in the fact that marijuana is more readily available than at any time in my lifetime and in my work in 42 years in law enforcement, and what we've also find it for the price of marijuana is a historic low. And you couple that with ease of access, and there's nobody, I don't care the age restrictions that you place, nobody's having any problem getting marijuana. Socially accepted. You look at our culture, it doesn't matter whether it's the entertainment world, whether it's the sports world, and basically there's just apathy in this society. Everybody's tired of hearing about marijuana. Usage rates are going up, and they will continue to go up, and it is the first casualty anytime we see this. Yeah, let's get this going. Let's talk about initiation of perception and perception of risk. When you start talking about initiates in the past year, 2019, haven't done 20 data yet, 12 and up, and you think about this, alcohol is still the most widely initiated substance for anybody 12 and above. Marijuana follows second. And you look at this, let's kind of put this in perspective. 3.4 million people initiated in 12. It's 95-29. You look at this breakdown, and it kind of puts it in perspective on just how many folks that are initiating. And this is up from 17 and 18. And what's concerning to me is not just the raw numbers of initiates, but when you look at SAMHSA data, to me, what's concerning in all three of these age groups is the increase in the number of people that are admitting using marijuana 200 days or more a year. And when you put that in perspective, that's using at least half a month every month of the year. I don't know how you can function when you are actively using this substance at least 16 days of every month. And that number grows every year amongst all three of these age demographics. And to me, that's an alarming concern. When you look at the alcohol industry, they're deriving about 80% of their products from about 20% of their consumers. And what we're seeing in Colorado, what we've seen in Washington, Oregon, is about 79% of the profits are derived from about 30% of the users. So it's mirroring pretty much what alcohol is seeing. Then you start talking about drug use and perceived risk. When you look at all of the perception of risk, when you look at marijuana, is perceived as 56% less harmful than LSD and alcohol. It's no wonder we start to see usage rates at where we are. The marginalization, and the industry's done fantastic job of normalizing this. And if you've got young people and they're engaged in social media and they're interested in marijuana, you know, they're getting anywhere from 40 to 60 impressions a day on marijuana, and probably 95% of those impressions are factually incorrect. So if you got young people, you need to be paying attention to their social media channels, whether they're on Snapchat, Instagram. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to these different things, but you need to be paying attention to what they're paying attention to and the message they're getting, because in most cases, it's not a factually correct message. Let's look at some public health treatment data. You know, when you look at why is this a concern, and you look at national treatment admission data from 14 to 18, and you look at the ranking of treatment admissions, heroin for 26 to 30-year-olds, alcohol for 46 to 55-year-olds. But it's important to understand in each of these years, the number one reason that 12 to 17-year-olds were seeking admission for treatment for addiction was marijuana. Think about that. 12 to 17-year-olds seeking admission for treatment for addiction is marijuana. For 4 straight years, that's been the case. And if you look at the Rocky Mountain HIDA data, and we look at some preliminary data that we've seen out of Oregon, and this is what really just kind of breaks my heart: suicides from 10 to 19-year-olds in Colorado with known toxins. The number one substance revealed in the toxicological screen in these individuals that took their own lives was marijuana, THC. And if that doesn't open your eyes to the problem, and I'm not even going to get into the instances of THC psychosis, THC-induced psychosis I've got a lot of material to cover, and I'm going to run out of time here. So let's talk a little bit about the black market and gray market, what have you, and I'm going to go through this. Just give you some Colorado data here. You say, why Colorado? Well, they were the first to do it. They are touted as the model for effective regulation. Colorado does it better than everybody. That being the case, they should do an effective job of mitigating the black market diversion, and nothing could be further from the truth. The Colorado Mountain Marijuana Enforcement Division is touted as the model for effective regulation, and the state of Colorado has done a horrible job at limiting trespass grows, limiting illicit grow ops, and trying to curtail diversion of marijuana in the state of Colorado. And you look at this data, and it just it is what it is. It speaks for itself. And I can tell you that you all aren't doing a very good job, and I'll show you that. I always like to show this slide because this is El Paso County, Colorado. This actually is Colorado Springs. And by population density, this is the second most with respect to dispensary concentrations outside of Douglas County, which is Denver. This has the greatest concentration of dispensaries per capita outside of Douglas County. And yet in 2018, the DEA took down 650 illegal Cuban grow houses in one county alone in 1 year. The ability to hide in plain sight is what this affords. So illicit marijuana is alive, thriving, and well in the state of Colorado. And guess what? Grab this off of a news article in your own county, in DuPage County. 40 pallets, 7,600 pounds, 406 pounds of edibles, cartridges, psilocybin mushroom bars taken right out of your own county in your backyard on the illicit market in DuPage County here. Why, you say, is when you've got an industry and you've got regs in the state, why do you still have the illicit market? Well, it's a simple matter of economics, and this is some industry numbers here. When you start to look at why this is the case right here, when you look at what it costs to produce on the illicit side, when you start talking about, $458 a pound to grow on the illicit side, as opposed to 705, and you look at, if it's going to cost me 2.9 million on the legal side, 1.9 million on the illicit side. If I'm going to try to at least get a 20% profit, On the legal side, all I got to do is sell my weed for $549 a pound. If I want to get that same profit, 20% on the legal side, I've got to sell my weed for $845 a pound. Understanding most of this is sold in gram weight. So you think about that, but you still have to recover your costs. So this is why you're going to continue to see, I don't care how well you attempt to regulate it, this is why you're going to continue to see the illicit market thrive. And it will continue to thrive for this very reason, is a way to circumvent the taxation in this, and your state and all the other states. Let's talk a little bit about products here as we start to head down why this is so critical. And you start looking at the commercialization of THC, and I already said 37 medical states, 17 full commercial states here, 47 hemp states, 20 by the industry's admission, a 25 to 30 billion dollar industry. And I don't think people really grasp the significance of the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. And I always like to give you this illustration. So if everybody here today that's watching this presentation, because you're here, I'm going to give you all of you $1 million. And I've got one caveat for you. You've got to spend $1,000 every day until your $1 million is exhausted. I can tell you that in 2.75 years, 2.75 years, you will have exhausted your $1 million. Now, I'm going to offer you the same deal. I'm going to give each and every one of you that are here today $1 billion with the same caveat that you have to spend $1,000 a day. I'd say there's probably not one of you, unless you've heard this presentation before, that will correctly guess that in 2,750 years, you will have expended your $1 billion. So that gives you an idea just how influential this industry is, not only at the State House, but also on the Hill in DC. We are inundated with a sea of weed and more to come. This gives you a snapshot of, and this is from the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations, about adult use marijuana in your state. Gives you an idea of sales and products being sold. You all are selling a lot of marijuana in 20 and 21, significant amount of marijuana being sold, not only to residents in the state, but also to out-of-state residents. And with that, you have made a significant tax haul with respect to gross receipts from taxation. And I think it's interesting, we all get fixated on how much tax revenue we've generated from the sales of commercial THC, but nobody really talks about what it cost us as a society. And we have some pretty concrete, pretty specific numbers with respect to tobacco and alcohol, because we have a rich history in this country with respect to the cost benefit analysis on alcohol. When you look at the models on alcohol taxation and tobacco taxation, those numbers are pretty much agreed upon. And we don't have that data with THC usage in this country. Matter of fact, we tried to fund a study in 2019 and 2020 and talked to some of the leading addiction economists in this country. And basically they told us that there's just not enough data available to make definitive causation analysis with respect to, Centennial in Colorado did some research, and they came to a 4.5 to 1 cost Colorado $4.50 for every one they take in. Though these addiction economists admitted that study had some holes in it. But I think when you start to look at as marijuana users continue to increase, as we continue to see states go down this road, that those numbers are not going to get too far from alcohol. That 10 to 1 ratio with alcohol and a 15 to 1 ratio with tobacco in this country. I can't imagine there's going to be much difference as we start to see the increase in the numbers of marijuana users in this country. But nobody wants to talk about what it's going to cost us. We all get fixated on how much revenue we're generating and what a panacea that is, without the hidden consequential cost to society that we really won't know for a few years what it actually is going to entail. Let's talk a little bit about marijuana. And again, I spoke earlier why this is significant when you start to talk about how this plant is evolved, not only from the potency side, but when Colorado did what they did in 12, it allowed the industry to hire botanists and agronomists, and they came in and basically genetically engineered and modified this plant. And this is commonly what you see in outdoor grows in the state of Washington and Oregon. The state of Washington has about a 36-hour grow season. And this is a medical marijuana plant in a regulatory compliance grow that we went on. This plant yielded 22.5 pounds of processed sellable bud, and 99 of these plants were there. The old DEA adage, an outdoor plant yield about 1.5 pounds is thrown out the window. The yields are through the roof, and so is potency through the roof here. Just a host of products here, CBD products that are available. And again, I'll just tell you with CBD, the old adage, caveat emptor, buyer beware, because what we're finding out that most of these products contain very little CBD, and just about all of them contain THC. So if you're taking one of these products for whatever ails you, because they'll cure anything for what the makers claim, just be aware that if you're subject to a random drug screen in your workplace and you're not successful in passing your drug screen, this may be the culprit here. Again, a host of products. We're going to go through vaping devices that are ever increasingly popular, particularly with our young people. They're increasingly popular because of the stealthiness of this device. You don't know if there's nicotine in them. You don't know if there's THC in them. And they come in about every shape, form, various, I love this picture. I took this in a dispensary, and if an SRO is to see a kid walking with a highlighter in his pocket, he wouldn't give 2 looks at this thing, but this is a vaping device that is preloaded with THC. And I asked this quote unquote bud tender, why in the world would you sell these devices? She said, well, we know that kids are going to use them, and we know they need to be able to hide their THC at school. Absolutely astounding that they're allowed to sell products like this, but this is what's readily available in the market. And vaping, again, continues to be an ever-present problem with our young people. It is the preferred delivery device with our young folks. The flavors, and understand that you're not vaping, you're vaping an aerosol. The host of issues, the eval, that we heard a lot about eval, lung injuries associated with vaping, but ever since COVID went away, I guess like everything else, eval went away, but I can assure you it hasn't. We're going to see an ever-present problem with lung-associated injuries as a result of vaping. More edible products. There essentially isn't anything that you cannot infuse THC in. And I'm a toothpick chomper, but when I ran across these, I had to throw my hands up. Enough is enough. Seriously, THC infused toothpicks or CBD infused toothpicks, it never ends. Vaginal suppositories. I mean, I'm just amazed. And when we were at San Diego in November, going into different dispensaries, just the products, if you can imagine a product, they can put THC in it. There's not an orifice in your body that you can't stick THC in anymore. So let's wrap this thing up pretty quickly. And, I don't care what your position is on legalization. I don't think any of us would argue that we need more research. The beauty of it is we are seeing more research. It's just, we're a few years away from getting some definitive results here. Potency levels are at all-time highs. We have got to start having a discussion about capping potency. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There has to be some discussion. It has to be grounded in science. It has to be grounded in the data. But we have to have some serious discussions about where do we and how do we and where should we cap potency, because it is out of control. Usage rates in legalized states are higher than non-legalized states. They're higher than the national average, and they're higher in those that don't do that. Court ordered, usually the method that most people get into treatment, they're down because of legalization. It makes sense. If you're not having contact with law enforcement, you're not getting into the court system. So we're not seeing the referrals that we do. Motor vehicle crashes, there's no mistaking that marijuana is playing an increase, and I'm not going to get into Jen's thunder, but it's playing an increasing role in automobile crashes and collisions. And she'll talk a little bit more about that. Diversion is increased to other locations. You all are no different. You're diverting to my state. You're diverting to Indiana. You're diverting all over the country. You've done a horrible job at limiting the black market, and you've done a crappy job at limiting diversion to states that are trying to keep this crap out. Hemp is a nightmare, and that's a whole nother presentation. Not only is it a regulatory nightmare, but it's starting to emerge as a public health concern also. Again, I've already talked about marijuana sales. They can benefit you, and I'm not going to tell you you're not going to make a load of tax revenue from that, but at what cost? And every time you talk about how much we're going to make, you should also ask yourself the question, but at what cost is it to our young people? What cost is it to our folks on the highway? What is the overall cost to our communities, to our state, to our society? And I can tell you what, it's not going to be a solution to your budget woes. Even Governor Hickenlooper told a group of governors, if you're doing this for your budget, you're wasting your time, because we're spending all of our time trying to regulate this industry. We're spending all of our money and our time trying to regulate this industry, but doing harm reduction as a result of the decision that we made. So I'm going to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite authors, and if you've seen my presentations, you've seen this quote, but every time you see this presentation of mine, you're going to see this quote, because what gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. Mr. Twain says what gets us into trouble, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, there is so much about this drug that just ain't so. And we need to be able to separate the fact from fiction, so that when we start to make these decisions with respect to public health, public safety, we do it from an informed basis. We do it from a basis grounded in science and grounded in research and data. And here's a resource for you. It's our new website, dnmi.org. Host of impact reports, educational videos, emerging information as the science, the research comes out. We're putting it out there. We have a speakers bureau, the Nmi Speakers Bureau, which Jennifer's part of our speakers bureau. Some really amazing people that we pay to come to you, that are at your disposal, that are just subject matter experts on a host of areas. So I would encourage you to go to the resource tab, look at our speakers bureau, and we're getting ready to completely revamp that. But we cover their cost to you. We're doing a lot of virtual presentations, but if they need to come to you in person, we'd be glad to cover the cost to send them to you. So take advantage of that. And we are on social media. I'm not, but we are. And here are our handles. I guess that's the correct terminology for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So like us, whatever you're supposed to do, follow us, all that good stuff you do, because I'm a dinosaur when it comes to that. I don't want to be on social media. I'm not on social media, but I understand we have to be on social media. We have to get the message out into the platforms that are there. And I'll just go the way of the dinosaur personally. And if you would be so kind as you can throw your phone up. It's a quick survey of this presentation. Tell me what you like or didn't like about it. It takes a couple minutes to do. And at the end, if you do this, Dale Quigley will send you $100 gift card from a dispensary in Colorado, so you can purchase the product of your choice. I'm just joking on that one. And here's our contact information. And we are old narcs. We answer our phone, unfortunately, to our spouse's chagrin, 24/7. Our phone numbers, our email. If we can be of any help to you, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are here to assist not only the 33 HIDAs, but our DFC and prevention partners across the country. We want to be a resource to all that are trying to educate people onto the reality of today's marijuana. And with that, I'll shut up, stop sharing, and turn it back over to you, Jordy.
Thanks, Ed. Great information. No doubt very knowledgeable. I could listen to all day, and I know you could talk all day. So I appreciate that. As a reminder, if you have questions, please throw those in the Q&A box and we will answer in real time if we can. Otherwise, we'll have some live Q&A at the end. I do see some questions in there already. And this webinar today is being recorded, so we will get a link out by the end of the week to everybody who is registered today. And with that, I'm going to throw it to our next speaker, who is Dr. Erin Weiner. Dr. Weiner is a board-certified psychologist and addiction specialist and speaks nationally on the topics of addiction, behavioral health, and the impact of drug policy on public health. Dr. Weiner, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Jory, and thanks everybody who's here today. I'm excited to talk to you about my portion because I think it's such critical information. And thank you, Ed, also for sharing all that data. I'm going to make sure to not retread too heavily over the topics that I've covered. But personally, what I am most passionate about in this subject is closing the gap between what we know, kind of piggybacking off that last slide, about what we actually do know in terms of the impact of marijuana on communities, on individuals, and then what it seems like the general public is aware of, what lawmakers are aware of, what physicians are aware of. It seems like there's this gap, and that's where the industry steps in that Ed talked so much about. But specifically in my portion, what I'd like to really focus on is the local impact, because I get this question asked a lot when I go to town hall meetings. Localities are just trying to decide what to do with their marijuana policy. It always comes down to this question of, well, the state made a decision, but how does this, does it matter than what we do locally? Is there any information to state that there are any benefits or any dangers to locating, to placing a dispensary in our town? And the very interesting answer to that question is yes, there is information. Unfortunately, this information wasn't here 3 years ago when we were making these decisions here in Illinois initially. But pretty much all the peer-reviewed data that I'm going to share with you today has been published since 2020. As more states have been doing this and as we've been able to collect data, but we actually do know a little bit more about what the impact is. And that's going to be my goal today, is to start broad, but then narrow down and talk about locally, what does this mean? Now, setting the stage broadly, and this again is something that Ed spoke on, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. Right now, marijuana sales are booming nationwide, just like with alcohol, with opioid overdoses. Everything hit a spike at the beginning of the pandemic and has not relented. Everyone is dealing with this very strong wave of negative emotions and anxiety and depression and parenting, all these things, and they're trying to figure out ways to cope. And in the absence of healthy ways to cope, people are turning to intoxicating substances, and it's causing a whole host of problems. Marijuana dispensaries are riding that wave. They were dubbed an essential business back in the beginning of the pandemic, and being an intoxicant, they're riding the wave along with everything else. Now, where I'd like to start, though, has to do with kids, and we'll work our way to adults as well. But specifically, what do we endorse and promote as recreation to our youth? And Ed did a great job in highlighting the fact that words really matter. And if you think about the model of how addiction forms, NIDA's got a great model on their website. That's where I pulled this from. It's this combination between the body, the biology and genes here on the left, the environment, which we can affect a little bit more, getting the drug, and then it works through brain mechanisms to eventually, through repetition, form addiction. And so where marijuana dispensaries fit in is in a couple of places. The first has to do with availability. And from, again, the minimal data that we have, I actually re-looked through the PsycInfo and PubMed, where I looked to get most of my clinical journal articles before this presentation. So there's still not as much data as I'd like, but there is some. What we know is that the more available a substance is, the more people tend to use it. So this study is actually from a couple of years back, showing that the more medical dispensaries, this was just looking at medical dispensaries, but the more medical dispensaries there were in an area in Los Angeles County, the more dispensaries is positively associated with more frequent use of marijuana and greater expectation of its positive results. So more available, more use. This study actually came out much more recently. It was looking in Washington State. And what they found here was that the results suggest that exposure to advertising, positive and negative outcome beliefs, and perceived peer norms were associated with intention to use marijuana, and the distances to retailers moderated these relationships. So then the state should pay attention to this. So how far away kids were from these dispensaries moderated whether or not these changes occurred. So again, these are very specific studies looking at, does distance, does proximity matter? And the answer here is yes. Further, we've seen this actually for many years, but 1 in 4 12th graders in the Monitoring the Future study, a national study, have said that if marijuana was legalized in their state, they would be more likely to try it or to use more. They're actually telling this to us. And this is something, I've got more data coming in a minute, that we'll see to be the case. This is what we're observing. Now, what's interesting about this, right, is that when we create commercial THC, commercial marijuana markets, we are going in the opposite direction of nicotine policy, which is something that Ed alluded to as well, where it seems like we're very much understanding that if we pass tobacco 21, we restrict the ability of young people to get tobacco, less people will use it. Yet for whatever reason, it seems like there's this disconnect. And there's this idea that, well, we're going to create all of these legal access points for this other drug, and that's not going to create new users of any age, but specifically for these first couple of studies for kids. Now, coming back to this model, the other area where legalization, but then also rubber stamping it and saying, oh yes, we are going to put this in our town, is the peer influences and community attitudes part of this model, where kids, teens in particular, they pick up on all this stuff. What's messaged out to them really does matter. And one of the greatest, most shrewdest marketing aspects of all of this is that while the potency and dangerous nature, the risks of these drugs are increasing over time, the perceived risk is going down across all age groups. It actually peaked in the late 90s, but you can see as the market started to pick up and as the messaging started getting out of there, I think Ed put it as kids born after the year 2000 have really only heard that there's been an amazing branding job done to equate cannabis with wellness. That's actually part of the trying to phase out the word marijuana as well, because that's more associated with, quote unquote, hippie culture or stoner culture, that sort of thing. The cannabis equals wellness is an idea that's been pushed and pushed and pushed. And as a result, the perceived harm of marijuana has been going down and down and down and down. As perceived harm goes down, use rates tend to go up. And so when you look at how kids are acting, the 2 areas where you see the most red here are for vaping nicotine and vaping marijuana. Vaping right now is in, very much it's in. Again, not an accident. This is because of a tremendous industry push, social media buys, all that sort of thing. But what we're seeing is that the only drugs that are going up these days is vaping, and then also marijuana and cannabis specifically. It's worth mentioning, the 2020 data doesn't show the same increase, but I think that there's a lot of artifacts of kids being around their parents during lockdowns, substances not as being available during lockdowns. And when you think about the fact that the Surgeon General literally just declared an emergency, there was an advisory put out for youth mental health, and everything that we're hearing right now about depression, anxiety in this country, we are going to see these numbers go up and rise tremendously. I cannot imagine they will not over the next couple of years, particularly when this year's data, 2022 data, is available in 2023. I think we're going to see a very strong rebound effect. And so it's very important that we continue to take this seriously. And without retreading too much ground here from Ed, he spoke already about how the potency has been going up and up and up to the point now where you basically can't even buy marijuana products that are less than 15% THC. This is a study that came out in 2020 that was looking at what proportion of products are being sold at what potency level. And what they found was that, again, pretty much everything is over 15% THC. In states with just a medical program, the average of flower was 19.2 and recreational was 21.5. And so when we think about what marijuana used to be, which is I think what a lot of people think it is now, like a pot from the mid 90s that was, or a joint rather, pot from the mid 90s that was 3 or 4% THC, compared to now, it's literally like lighting up 7 joints at the same time and smoking them. And that is the only marijuana actually that kids these days have ever known, yet there's still this perception that it's this quote unquote lighter drug. And this mirrors what we've seen change over time from these products, where joints and blunts and bongs were ways of smoking marijuana flower. But now, as Ed was mentioning, that's a minority of the market. We're seeing things like these very high potency concentrates that you can use in a number of different ways, including vaping, and then of course edibles. And these pictures, by the way, I took off of Illinois dispensary websites. This isn't like from Colorado or California. This is from here. We've got pot lollipops, we've got pot chocolate bars, we've got pot gummies. I mean, it's all right here. And the question that hopefully is bouncing around in everyone's head when you look at these things is, what demographic do these products appeal to the most? How many 45-year-olds are sucking on a pot lollipop? You know, it's pretty easy and to see what's going on. And this highlights the fact that there are both oblique like this and direct ways like this, where marijuana dispensaries literally they're going after young and younger people, because that's actually where they make the majority of their money. I'll get to that slide in a second. But just to give you a couple local examples, I'm up in the northwest suburbs. And a couple years back at Buffalo Grove Days, the dispensary here was handing out swag to kids. And when they were given an opportunity to apologize in the Daily Herald, they said, oh, well, kids are our patients too. We'll focus mostly on adults, but this is fine. And over in Northbrook, the dispensary there, against our regulations here in the state, used an animal as a mascot, this raccoon with sunglasses. And what made this particularly egregious, though, is that it is literally, you can map this, right down the street from Ravinia Elementary School, which has a raccoon as a mascot. And when you look at the names of the products that are being sold as well, who is this aimed at? When you're naming things like banana cookies and clementine and mandarin cookies. And then here's, I just pulled this out the front page of the dispensary, a mango sherbet, magic melon, lemon bean. This is an older photo. I'm not sure if they're selling it, but they literally, this was back when we just had medical marijuana. They were literally selling green crack. That was the name of one of the medical marijuana strains. That was, by the way, 26.93% THC. And all of this is on purpose. This is part of the reason why I'm showing it to you. You could literally call this anything. And part of why I point this out is that in Connecticut, actually, I wish we'd done this here. We didn't do this here. But in Connecticut, actually, they said, well, we're going to ban cannabis street names because they were naming it things like Fruity Pebbles and Wedding Cake. And so actually in Connecticut, this is how they name their products. They still have the really high potency stuff, like 31%, 29%, that's a whole different thing, but they're calling it Hybridol GST28. I mean, this is, if you want to get a little bit better, because again, we're still talking about 92% THC concentrates. This is what it looks like when you take at least a little bit of that marketing away, but we're not doing that here. We haven't done that here. And there's a reason why these products are named in these ways. And that reason is because, as Ed mentioned, the lower the perceived risk, the more likely someone is to use your product. This is an axiom in the drug world. This is an axiom in the addiction for profit world. You need to make your product seem as harmless as possible. So this is data showing from age 12 to 17, what is the likelihood here on the left that you're going to be binge drinking? And then on the right, using marijuana, if you perceive there to be a great risk or not. And you can see that for binge drinking, you literally have a 2 times greater chance of doing it in the last month if you're an adolescent, if you're a teenager, if you don't think it's a great risk. And for marijuana, it is literally 15 times more likely that you're going to do it if you don't see it as very risky. And so you couple with this with the fact that when you look at the current US marijuana users by age, the biggest market demographic here is 18 to 29 years of age. People who are either too young to buy it legally or just old enough to buy it legally, but of course not when your brain is done developing, which is a whole other story. But one of the biggest precipitous drop-offs in this graph that is very clear to the industry is when someone turns 30 and they move into that other demographic. 50% profit loss. There's a lot, people tend to age out of this. And so for the business, because that's what it is, and businesses are here to make money, for the businesses to make as much money as they can, they're looking to get as much out of that biggest demographic as they can before they hit that 50% loss. And so just a couple more recently published examples. This one came out last year, showing differences in adolescent use rates between Alaska and Hawaii, where in Alaska, they allowed legalized recreational marijuana in 2016, and Hawaii did not. And you can see immediately how these trajectories changed. And here here's another study from California. This one came out, I believe, also in 2021, that are showing when they legalized how the slopes changed across a couple of different sub-demographics, if you will, like male versus female and grades. But you can see where they legalized, the slopes change almost immediately. And that's because there is an impact in terms of what we message out. Now, getting back again to the local question. So let's move up an age bracket here up to young adults, who still matter, by the way. I mean, this is another thing where I feel like we do spend a lot of time talking about kids, because from a brain perspective, that's where the most damage is done to the brain. But it's not like all of a sudden you stop having health concerns when you turn 18 or when you turn 21. With these substances, they matter too. What this one found, though, was that as retailers open closer to where they live, more individuals use marijuana and more frequently. And they found that the effects are concentrated amongst young adults, and then also specifically women in rural residents. This study, this one came out in 2020 as well. This one was looking at young adult outcomes again. What they found was within a 4-mile impact radius of putting down a dispensary, there was a greater likelihood of use, greater likelihood of heavier use, stronger intentions to use, and more use-related problems. And again, this is within 4 miles of putting down a dispensary. So if you put a dispensary down, that means that the likelihood of these things around that dispensary are going to increase. This study actually just came out about 2 weeks ago. This is hot off the presses, and they found essentially the exact same thing. I didn't underline everything because this is basically all relevant. Living within 1 kilometer, so that's 2.2 miles, of at least one cannabis retail outlet was statistically significantly associated with any past year and at least monthly cannabis use, as well as high perceived access to cannabis. That's what we spoke about before. Results using a 2 kilometer, so 4.4 mile buffer, showed similar findings. And they actually also found that neighborhood disadvantage was statistically significantly associated with at least weekly or daily use and greater perceived acceptability. So not only is it more likely that you're going to use, but if you are in a disadvantaged neighborhood or place, that is enhanced, that you're going to have a marijuana problem if you bring in a dispensary. Local data. This one, looking in California, what they found here, 50 California cities, was that this one found something a little bit different. They found that it was related to current use and frequency, but not lifetime. So this study found that if someone was already using marijuana, opening the dispensary increased their habit. And ultimately what you're looking at here is that when you compare states with legal markets to not legal markets for young adults, there is a very clear effect of upping that availability and messaging out that this is something that we do know. Now, another aspect of this that is particularly concerning is the relationship that we see between marijuana use and later opioid use. This study came out in 2017 that found that if you are using recreational marijuana, occasionally, and here, you have a 5 times greater odds ratio from 0.5 to 3 of developing a new addiction to prescription pain pills, and an 8 times greater chance if you're using frequently or very frequently. And this was a longitudinal study across 3 years. This study just came out last year, I believe, 2021, might have been 2020. think 2021. But what they found here, they were looking at a young adult urban cohort of color. And what they found was that here on the right, here's the chances that if you are using low or not or no marijuana, your chances of developing an addiction, again, longitudinal study of all opioids on the left, prescription in the middle, and heroin on the right. Here, as you go left, here's young adult onset. You can see those chances creep up. So that's 18 to 25. Here is limited use in adolescents. Look how much higher that is already. It's 9% to 2% for heroin. That's 4.5 times higher. But now look here, adolescent chronic onset as well. Look how high that is. The chances that you are going to develop an addiction. And the reason why I point this out is that there's another one of these fake debates about whether marijuana is a gateway drug, quote unquote. And I say fake debates because there's no debate. Of course it is. Just like there's no debate that it's physically addictive. We have journal article after journal article about it. The reason why I think there's a debate is that people think gateway means determinism, and that's not what it means. What it means is this. Imagine like you've got a kid who has never used a drug before in their life, and a friend walks up and says, "Hey, I've got a bag of heroin. You want to tie off and inject?" That kid be like, "Nope. Hard pass," right? Not going to do that. Because who says yes to that? Nobody says yes to that. But now, say you've got a kid and the friend walks up and says, "Hey, you want to take a hit off this THC vape? Like you want to take a hit off this pen?" Or maybe they've got a joint and the kid's thinking, "Oh, well, I want to be part of this friend group and it's legal anyway, so it must be safe. Isn't it medicine? Adults are doing it. It's not a big deal." All of these tropes that the industry has really put out that we've all messaged out to a certain extent. Much more likely to do that. And the rates of use bear that out. But think about what just happened there. One, now this is a kid whose identity is shifting. Now this is a kid who gets high for fun. Now this is a kid also who does something that's against the law because it's not legal to use. They're giving themselves, they're creating a permission structure to use drugs and to break the law. And they're hanging out with people who get high for fun. Which means at some point they're much more likely to come across a line of cocaine or a bar of Xanax or a hallucinogen. And they're much more likely to use it because instead of being like, "Well, I don't use drugs, I don't break the law, I don't do any of these things," their identity is shifted. And maybe at some point someone shows up with Percocet and maybe they really like the Percocet and they, then they fall into the prescription opioids, but those are more expensive on the street, which is why people go to heroin. And then heroin is tainted with fentanyl, which is what's leading to these overdose deaths right now. Fentanyl is driving all of that and they're still going up. I just pulled a screenshot off the provisional numbers that the CDC has released. You can keep track of these yourself, by the way. It seems like it only makes the mainstream news when we hit like a landmark, like 100,000 deaths a year, but it's still going up and it's going up a lot. And so what gateway means is that you open a path forward. You don't get to step 4. You don't get to fentanyl overdose just like from jump. Sometimes you do, but that's rare. It's a progression. It's a progression that takes time. And so you can't get to step 4 if you don't take step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3. So if you never get started down that path, you're never going to get to the end of it. And that's what gateway means. You've literally opened a path for progression. And just as a quick note about this, because I'm also very passionate about the opioid epidemic and trying to come up with different and innovative ways to stem this, marijuana is not one of those ways. And this is another idea that's been bandied about inappropriately. This was a study actually that was looking specifically at what happens when people try to substitute marijuana in for opioids. And they found actually that when you do the research, when people use marijuana, the odds of them using opioids on the same day goes up by 2. You're twice as likely to do that. This is really not a solution. And related to having to be transported for an overdose, what we find also is when you plop down a dispensary, what we find is that an additional 1 dispensary per square mile is associated with a 6.8% increase in the number of marijuana hospitalizations. And this is mirroring that other study, other local characteristics such as median household income, age, and racial ethnic distributions were associated with marijuana hospitalizations as well. So all of this fits together in a web that I think Ed made mention of this fact of what does this bring? What value does this bring to your community? How does this help? I am still waiting to see that data published about how it helps a community to do this. And again, if the question is, well, like we just want money, then the question is, okay, well, what's the health of your young people, of your adolescents worth to you? You're maybe selling that for a certain amount of money that maybe you're not actually keeping anyway because you're spending it on public health costs and regulation. That might actually just be a mirage, like in one pocket and out the other. The last thing that I want to cover before I turn it back over to Jory is something that Ed also made mention to briefly, and I'm also just briefly going to touch on it, but I think it shows the character of what these dispensaries are doing and what the industry writ large is doing, not even just dispensaries. But I want to talk about two new products that you might have already seen around. One is Delta-8 THC. It's actually derived from CBD and hemp, and it's 50 to 75% as psychoactive as Delta-9 THC. The thing about it is, though, is that because it's derived from hemp, it's actually legal under the laws that allow you to sell hemp because it's a hemp-based product. It's illegal in 39 states, and Illinois is one of them. Actually, we've got the yellow for under review, but that just means that the legislation was proposed, it didn't go anywhere. So right now, it's not regulated here. You can just buy it from gas stations, wherever you like. It's completely unregulated. There's no health and safety standards. It's made using toxic chemicals. Essentially, you use very toxic chemicals to convert CBD into Delta-8 THC. And this has led the FDA to put out an article about it. Apparently their graphic design team was on vacation and someone used MS Paint to make this image, but it's a good article. And we won't go too far into it now, but this is just a way that people are trying to circumvent laws, put products in front of, again, young people. If we go back, I mean, look at this, guys, right? Like, I mean, who is buying this? Who sees that monkey? Who sees that monkey and thinks, I want that? That appeals to me and my lifestyle. Who are they aiming at? The other product I want to touch on is Thco Acetate. This is a product that is rumored to be 3 times as strong as THC. It's produced from Delta-8. So again, this is the hemp pathway. So you can buy this anywhere, your CBD, kratom shops, all of it. But it's 3 times as strong as THC. And again, I say rumored because literally you look up information on this, there is nothing. You cannot, this is being sold all over the place. We have zero information about it. This is from a marijuana business website, from a marijuana scientist. What he's saying, heroin is to morphine as THC acetate is to THC, makes them more potent. That's because whenever you acetylize something, that's what an acetate means. You acetylize it, it passes through the blood-brain barrier very easily. That's why heroin goes through easier than morphine. It's acetylized. So it makes them more potent. It's a euphoric product. Nobody has safety data. No one's saying we did safety checks on this. No one's done it. Even he says releasing these products without safety data is just foolish. And before we sum things up, I want to actually end with a very brief video. Just to show you kind of like what's out there in the diaspora, if you will, of the commercial marijuana world. This is a YouTube video from a show called The Strain Show. And he's got a bunch of subscribers, this gentleman does. And what I'm going to show you here is just a couple minutes of him. He's already taken some hits off of a THCO vape pen. You can see that down next to his Juicy Kush THCO edibles. And now he's trying the edibles and he's going to tell us what it's like. So we're just going to watch a couple minutes of this.
Color. That's good. I'm going to eat one more for a total of 100 milligrams. And I'll see how that's going to act. That's 100 milligrams deep. And
really quickly, 100 milligrams is a lot. 100 milligrams is a lot of just regular THC, much less a product that is supposed to be 3 times as potent.
Now that I'm through eating this candy, I realize that this buzz from the vape pen is getting stronger. I'm not sure how much stronger, but it's going to take a minute for this to happen. I was looking over there because there's a clock. I feel like it's only been 5 or 10 minutes from this vape and that this vape buzz might be getting stronger. I feel like stronger than the buzz from a regular Delta-8 pen would be if I would have just hit it a few times like I did this. But we're going to come back and we're going to check in maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, see what this is all about. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, it's been 1 hour. So far, so good. I'm feeling it for sure, but so far it feels pretty much like a regular D9 edible, which if D9 or regular THC is illegal where you live, that's really tight that you can get stuff legally that can get you baked, get you medicated, and potentially get you a bunch of benefits that you couldn't get legally any other way. But it's only been an hour, and I feel like this might get even stronger. Plus, I'm still a little buzzed from that pen. Well, let's come back in one more hour and see what's up. Okay, now it's been 2 hours. And I would say that in this last hour, the effects of this stuff have probably doubled in their intensity. It still feels really similar to a regular Delta 9 THC edible buzz of the same milligrams, but it's about twice as strong as it was an hour. And it might still be getting stronger. I'm not sure. We're going to check in one more hour and see. Okay, boom. It has been 3 hours now, and I would say that the effects have gotten even a little stronger since the last hour. I feel like this stuff is really similar to regular THC edibles, so don't think that just because this stuff is legal that you can take a whole bunch of it and necessarily be fine, because you might get super baked just like you would off a regular edible. So always start slow with what you take, because you can always take more, but you can never take less. So both of these from Juicy.
All right. So I feel like, you know, like when we're watching this and like you look at the state of him here and you hear what he's talking about access and getting completely baked and being just as strong as Delta 9. I feel like his video, you know, I think different people are watching this in different ways, but I know that we're all here because we're approaching this from a public health context, right? And we're approaching this from the idea of how can we try to create communities that are as safe as possible. And this is where the industry is going, right? This is, and we could talk about this for a very long period of time, but the question, as you heard him say, if it's not available, if you can't get Delta 9, so the availability matters of all of it. And I'm putting this on your radar as well, because this is a very related and growing issue right now. Keep your eyes open for it, again, because you can buy THCO anywhere. It's just legal to buy because it's not being regulated. And we have no idea what's in this stuff. So in terms of, to sum everything up, commercial THC is a business. The goal is to make money and to grow a customer base. That's just what businesses do, right? But when you create this market, that's what we've done here in Illinois. The question then is, what happens when you bring that influence right next to your community, towards your young people? Because again, 25 and under is the demographic that's affected the most by this. The addictive behavior, remember, this is influenced by access to the product. That's what you create when you open a dispensary. Lower perceived risk. That's what you create when you welcome in a dispensary. And increased normalization. Again, what we message out, what we put in our community, what we create access to. This is something that's working. Marijuana use is increasing in legal states, particularly in the 18 to 5 demographic. So this is something that we've seen, and these additional intoxicating products that are cannabinoid based, they're using workarounds to reach a broader market. Actions needed if we're going to protect public health and prevent addiction around this. Certainly, there's a lot that needs to be done. But in terms of your own actions, and as you're weighing the pros and cons of doing this, and again, I really personally don't see the pros aside from, you know, money, but again, it's hard for me to put a price tag on those 6.8% of people being transported to the emergency room, and the people getting into. I'm a clinical psychologist. I treat addiction is my specialty, so I treat people on the flip side of this literally every day, and so I know I'm coming from a biased perspective, and I see the human fallout of these decisions, but trying to claim that there's no human fallout from these decisions, that we're not creating addiction, that we're not doing these things, even at the local level, is either, in my opinion, ignorant or disingenuous, because you're looking past the data that we have that shows that it truly is the case. So thanks everybody for listening today. Thanks PLT and Jory as always for partnering with me and giving me an opportunity to speak. If anybody would like to reach out, there's my email and my website, or feel free to connect with me on social media. And with that, I will pass the baton back.
Thanks, Dr. Weiner. Another speaker I could listen to all day, and always great new information that you share with us. Our last two panelists are Jennifer Cifaldi and Dan Staffy. They are going to co-present and talk about some traffic safety issues that we are seeing in our state. Jen Cifaldi is the Illinois Traffic Safety Resource Prosecutor. She also developed a DUI no refusal search warrant model that has now been adopted as a standard for law enforcement agencies and prosecutor offices across the state. And then Officer Dan Staffy is a 15-year law enforcement veteran, a drug recognition expert, and instructor with the Village of Carroll Stream. So with that, I'll let you guys take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Give me just a minute to get my screen share up. Oops, hold on here. Oh, sorry. I don't know what just happened there. Give me a second. Let me get back to that. Sorry about that. Great job by our, I don't know why that's jumping to that. Great job by our co-panelists. Let me get back. Here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, and can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Dan and Officer Staffy and I are here to talk today about, what we've seen in the last 2 years since this has happened. And our focus is on the impaired driving aspect. And I just want to say that when it comes to the, youth side of things, it gets very tricky for Dan and I to address like what's happening with the kids. And that is because when it comes to their records, it's largely protected by, the fact that, anything with the juveniles, we don't have access to that information when it comes into the court system. So it's a little bit difficult to talk about that, but I know Dan can anecdotally give information and I can tell you what I'm seeing as well. So let's just dive in, and Dan, please, jump in with me here. Don't make me fly solo. I know you won't. But let's talk about what's been happening with alcohol just over the course of the years. And the other thing too is when it comes to data, from that Illinois Department of Transportation collects, they're always about 2 years behind. And some of that just has to do with the fact that they cannot release information until court cases are complete. So that makes it a little difficult as well. But what we see with the alcohol impaired drivers, oops, I don't know why that keeps jumping ahead on me. Sorry about that. What we see with the alcohol impaired drivers is that we are definitely, I'm sorry. I don't know why this thing is so sensitive here. Let's get to the alcohol impaired drivers. What we're seeing with the alcohol impaired drivers is that our driving deaths are on the decline, which is great, right? We look from 2002 down to 2019, and we see these, they call it drunk driving deaths. I don't like that word. I think it's impaired driving due to alcohol. This is reporting from 0.08 BAC and above. Those are finally starting to come down. But it's taken decades, literally decades, for us to get that message across that, alcohol and car keys, just not a good mix, right? But when it comes to our cannabis impaired drivers, and this was from Illinois, the alcohol information, look what's happening with our cannabis impaired drivers. And they can't even really say for sure impaired. What they say is cannabis involved driving in our fatal crashes. We see this huge increase, and it's gone just skyrocketed from 2007 to 2018. And so I know everybody wants to know like what's going to happen or what has happened since 2020. Well, we know that cannabis is much more readily available. There's social acceptance involved. There's a lot of factors going on. And then there's COVID, right? So Dan, can you talk for a few minutes about, as a police officer, how COVID affected your ability to pull over motorists? Dan, are you on there? Dan, have you unmuted? I don't know what's going on with Dan here. Jordan, can you still hear me?
I can hear you, Jen, and it doesn't look like Dan is muted, but we cannot hear him.
Okay. All right. Well, I can probably talk for Dan for a minute here about that. But let me just say that I know from talking to law enforcement that we have had a real issue with the fact that yeah, I don't know what happened to Dan. We lost Dan there for a minute. We've had a real issue with the enforceability aspect of, you know, of DUIs. In fact, I was privy to information that was sent out to, you know, the different law enforcement agencies, and they were essentially told to stand down and to not stop vehicles. So they were able to respond if there was a crash. But as far as actively enforcing, you know, the DUI laws and going out, and they call it hunting, you know, if you want to go hunt for a DUI, you can, you know, be a proactive officer like Officer Staffy is. But for some reason, we can't hear Dan right now. But anyways, I know that the officers were told to stand down. So that's a problem. And so, and I can only imagine that the industry is going to run with that. And they're going to say, hey, look, you know, when we, you know, legalized, and again, I hate that word too, it's commercialized. When we commercialized marijuana in the state of Illinois, the DUI numbers didn't go up. Well, they didn't go up because of the fact that our officers were told to stand down because of COVID. And enforcement, even 2 years out from COVID and 2 years out from the January 1st, 2020 date, we still are not having officers stopping like they used to. They're just not able to do that. So we've had a real difficult time with that. Dan, are you on there now?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Dan, do you want to talk for a few minutes more about what I was saying? I don't know if you could hear what I was saying.
Well, I had to log off. Sometimes with Zoom, when you mute, the only way to get the mute off is to go back on. So
Okay.
I logged off, came back on.
So Dan, I was talking about, you know, the fact that officers were essentially told to stand down during COVID. And so I think that when we do get 2020 and 2021 numbers for DUI cannabis stops, it doesn't stop the fatalities from happening because those happen and then you have to respond. But just from, you know, I was telling our audience that you were an active hunter for DUIs, but how has COVID affected your ability to shine that spotlight on these cannabis impaired drivers?
Well, COVID's really restricted us over the last couple of years. In the heart of COVID a year ago, basically every department, even Illinois State Police, we were all restricted from our traffic stops. At my department, we were basically told, unless that car is bouncing off the curbs, don't stop it. We went on that about 6 to 8 months. Our traffic unit, which is 5 of us, we were allowed to start making traffic stops probably about 4 months in. And we started with basically North Avenue is our main hunting ground. It's 45 miles an hour. We were told the first 3 weeks, don't stop anything under 70. And then we started stopping people who are like, I can't believe you're stopping us. Nobody's stopping anybody. So we were really, really curtailed on what we could actually do out there. So it was difficult. I would say that probably for most departments was basically all of 2020. Okay. We were all really slowed down with what we could do. Another thing that's caused a problem with really accurately tracking cannabis DUIs is training and education. Cannabis impairment for officers looks a lot different than alcohol impairment. So that also makes it really difficult to come up with accurate numbers on what we're really seeing with cannabis DUIs out there. We had a question pop up as well. Question that popped up a little while ago, I don't know if we addressed it when I was off, was, are there any good ways to really look at impairment with nanograms or levels of cannabis in people's system? As of right now in the state of Illinois, we really don't test for what we're looking for impairment. We're testing for delta-9 THC. That's probably not the best thing that we should be testing for. The nanograms we're using, we took right out of Colorado, which were 5 nanograms or more in blood and 10 nanograms or more other bodily substance. There are no good studies out there that show what nanogram level actually affects people's abilities to drive. I can give you examples where I've had subjects that we send most of our cannabis samples or our blood or urine samples to University of Illinois Chicago, the AFTL lab. I have people that went off the scales. They can't test. They have many nanograms in their system, and their impairment doesn't look that bad. I've had people that don't match the 5 and 10 nanograms where their impairment is horrible. They look like the worst drunk driver you'd ever see. So in answer to that question, do we have a good nanogram level to really test for impairment? No, we don't.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point, Dan. And that's where we have to be careful in just looking at data that's, unless you're on the inside track of how that data is really broke down, we can attribute false, false feelings towards it and false information about it. So it's interesting that you brought that up, Dan. And in my presentations, I always ask officers and prosecutors, are you approaching these DUI cases with beer goggles on? Because we could just see from Dr. Weiner's presentation that Juicy Kush THCO video, if an average officer saw that guy on 1 hour out from that, and they're not smelling anything, and they're just seeing him sit there and talk. And I noticed too, Dan, I couldn't see, I don't think his eyes were very dilated, and officers are always trained to look for dilated pupils. This guy's pupils weren't dilated.
I'm glad you brought it up because I actually noted on that video, subject's pupils were not dilated.
Right.
And that's one of the things we look for. Now, as far as DREs go, drug recognition experts go, we have something called a matrix, which basically gives us a description of drug categories and things we look for. When it comes to cannabis, we do have an exception. It's exception number 6 that says the subject's pupils may be dilated. But that's a perfect one because I'm looking at his eyelids. His eyelids are droopy. He's showing all the indications that we're trained to look for, except for the big one, dilated pupils. Now, I know when I go into court, the defense attorney's going to come and attack me right at that. Well, his pupils aren't dilated. And I'll go back to my exception 6, but that's going to be a problem. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right, Jen. Good catch on that. His pupils were not dilated.
Right, which a lot of times from talking to you all, and we'll talk more about the DREs and A-RIDE training here in a minute, but I've learned through the years of working with these officers that if their pupils aren't dilated, it's sometimes because of the fact that they are regular cannabis smokers and their eyes have just gotten accustomed to not being dilated anymore.
And this goes back to what Ed and Erin both talked about earlier with the lack of sufficient testing really out there. We don't have a lot of good testing studies going on out there that can show us that. That's what DREs look at. They say, you know what, we're seeing this on habitual users that maybe their pupils don't dilate, but we don't have those tests out there. And another problem that we have with the testing that we're doing is any of the federal testing is done with federally grown cannabis, which really doesn't exceed 5 to 6% of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. And as Ed pointed out earlier, and so did Erin, your average flower out there is going to be around 30% delta-9 THC, and your vapes are through the roof. So it's very difficult to get any really good studies out there when we haven't really addressed those situations. We have another question out there from Karen. I'm confused with the link between COVID-19 and encouraging law enforcement to reduce traffic stops. Can you explain? Yes, here's what's going on. And this actually happened to my unit about 3 weeks ago. If I go out there and make a traffic stop and I get exposed to cannabis and I don't know it, and then I come back to my department and I spread it, I could have my entire department down and unable to respond to other situations in the village. All right. About 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were teaching A-RIDE at our police department. We got exposed by one of the guests at our class. My entire traffic unit, except for one person, ended up out with COVID for 3 weeks. Now, that's why this was discouraged at the heart of COVID, was because the villages were all afraid that they could lose an entire police department down on COVID. So that's why traffic stops were discouraged. Any non-essential contact was discouraged because they were afraid of what could happen to the police department and not being able to respond to other situations that might require us to be out there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Let me jump to the next slide just so we can keep moving in. So like I said, if you see, from this slide that came from IDOT, our data information ends in 2018. So again, what's going to happen, 2020 and beyond? Well, all you have to do is look. Oh, I don't know why that doesn't want to. That locked me up. If you look at the information, this is from our friends at Nmi, Ed's group and my group. I'm on their Speakers Bureau. Just from 2011 to 2017, in their state, overall Colorado fatalities increased by 44.9%, and fatalities with operators testing positive for marijuana went up by 157%. Why do we think Illinois would be any different? Right? If COVID hadn't come along and we could be out there actually enforcing the laws that we were pre-COVID, then I think we would be able to give a much more accurate, data than what we have. So, and again, the industry will run with what they run with. They'll look at it and say, hey, look, our cannabis impaired driving actually went down. So, and we know, this comes from SAMHSA. We know that marijuana is such a prevalent drug. We know that, our other speakers have spoken on that and touched on that and did a great job. So I don't need to repeat what they're saying, but let's talk about what we can do. And Dan, this is where I'm going to turn it over to you a little bit here in a minute, but what can we do to correct this enforcement problem? Well, first of all, we need to train law enforcement to recognize signs and symptoms of marijuana impairment. Everybody out there in our field and Dan and I's field, they all want that quick, easy fix. They want some sort of mouth swipe test or something that just says, hey, what's that quick and easy fix to use that we can just pull out a stick, look at it and go, yep, this person's impaired, like they do with alcohol, and we cannot compare apples and oranges here. This is not the same beast at all. So what we have to do in our opinion, and I think I can speak freely for Dan, that the best tool to identify an impaired driver, be it from alcohol or cannabis or any other type of drug, is to train the officer. Train the officers, and we're going to talk about those specific trainings here in just a minute. Dan will get into the DRE a little more detailed and the A-RIDE stuff. But we also need to work with prosecutors and judges to educate them about the dangers of marijuana impairment. I have been literally banging my head against the wall, trying to break through to get to judges to let them understand they've got to take those beer goggles off. If they saw that guy Juicy Kush doing, speaking and talking in that video, they might look at that and go, he didn't look impaired to me, because they're looking at it through the beer goggle lens, through the alcohol lens. And so we've got a real problem with even our officers are doing a great job. We're expanding our training, but our prosecutors and our judges are very limited in their knowledge and information about how dangerous this drug really is. And then we need to overcome, the problem of funding enforcement and deal with that issue. So Dan, on this next slide here, if you would go ahead and explain, I put this together as a graphic to explain to our audience what type of training officers normally get, and then what's the highest level of training they can get for drug driving, which is where you're at, and you're actually an instructor for drug recognition experts, and then what this A-RIDE stuff is all about.
Basically, when an officer goes to the police academy, they get basic standard field sobriety test training, where they learn how to administer the field sobriety test, what we call the horizontal gaze and nystagmus test, which is an eye test, the walk and turn test, which is a true divided attention test. That's where they walk the line if you've watched Cops or other TV shows. And then you have the one leg stand test. Again, it's where they're going to stand on one leg. And we're trying to look at different things. We train the officers that, contrary to popular belief, the standard field sobriety tests are not pass-fail tests. They're tests that show indications of impairment. Once you're out of the academy, you're out there and doing well. We highly recommend that you go to Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement. That's what we call A-RIDE. It's NHTSA, TSI's, IACP's training for drug driver training. That is the true NHTSA training. And what that does, that introduces the 7 drug categories. and some alternative field sobriety tests that are really aimed and focused on detecting drug impairment. It's an outstanding class. It's a 2-day class. It probably actually should be a 3-day class, but trying to get officers into training for 2 days away from their department is hard enough, let alone getting them out there for 3 days. All right. When they go to A-Ride, we introduce them also to the Drug Recognition Expert program, also called the Drug Evaluation Classification Program. That is the highest level of training there is for law enforcement personnel. It is a very intense training program. We just finished up the 15th Illinois DRE class at the Illinois State Police last week. This week, they're moving into what's called their field certification phase. The field certification phase where they're going to go out and they're going to do live labs with impaired subjects that are under the influence of the different drug categories. They have to get 12 of those evaluations correct before they can sit for their final comprehensive knowledge exam and get certified as a DRE. The DRE program is very difficult to get through. When I went through it in 2012, there were over 300 applications, 27 went into the class, and about 14 of us achieved our certifications. It's a certification that really only 1% of law enforcement ever achieves. It's very difficult. It is not for everybody. It's a very difficult dedication, but the whole premise of the DRE program is to determine if the subject's impaired. If they are impaired, is it medical impairment or is it drug impairment? Very often, medical impairment will look just like drug impairment. If you've ever had somebody that's suffering from a diabetic issue, or maybe has MS, stroke, shock, all these can look like drug impairment. If it's medical impairment, we train our officers to get them medical help right away. If there's any doubt, we train our officers to get medical help right away. But if it's not medical, if it is drug impairment, which of our 7 categories or combination thereof cause the impairment? Your DREs do a very good job. They generally are somewhere in the mid-90s in calling a drug category and in the high 90s of calling drug impairment versus other impairment. But it's very difficult training to get through, and if they get through that training, they're very good. What makes cannabis so difficult to determine or even prosecute is, number one, a lot of officers don't have the A-Ride training that they should have. Number 2, looking at cannabis impairment, like Jen said, the gentleman that Erin showed on the video, a lot of people look at him and say, you know what, he's talking fine, he looks fine. They don't know those details to look for. Or a lot of our guests today that are watching that video may say, hey, he's stoned. But when we say, what about that person is impaired or stoned, describe it to us. And then all of a sudden people have trouble. Officers have the same problem. If you can't describe that in detail or articulate it, probably going to lose your case. So it can be very difficult to articulate that. Our judges out there, as Jen said, they really want to see drunk-like behavior performance on field sobriety tests. Understanding cannabis is more of a cognitive impairment. You can see the divided attention impairment that we look for on our standard field sobriety test. It is there, but it's up to the officer to really, really focus on the administrative procedures in the standard field sobriety test. Something as simple as not having them watch their feet on the walk-in turn can allow them to look like they did really good and show very little impairment. Cannabis really messes with their eyes. It affects something called lack of convergence, which affects depth perception. On the one-leg stand, if you let them look off into space, they'll probably do very good at it. The second we tell them, which the administrative procedure says they have to watch that raised foot, all of a sudden the ground and the foot start moving and the feet come down. So it's very important that the officers are very well trained and really can look at what's required in those administrative procedures.
So Dan, if I might for just a minute,
Go ahead.
let's speak in layman's terms. I know it's hard. We get into like copies and, talk about like all these tests and stuff, but we got to understand probably a majority of our audience may not know those standardized field sobriety tests. Help me explain, or please explain to our audience how, like that guy, Juicy Kush, right? How that impairment would play out behind the wheel. Don't talk about the standardized field sobriety test for a minute, but like what problems would that person in that condition have with operating a motor vehicle?
biggest thing I look for right away with that subject, his eyes aren't dilated, so I really can't go in that part. But we know that cannabis really affects what we call lack of convergence, which is a stereo acuity of the eyes. The eyes can't come together and focus, so their depth perception is messed up. Also, the cognitive impairment, the thought process. And the easiest way I can explain that is a normal driver driving down the road sees a ball come out from a residential area into the street. Your non-impaired subject sees that ball, they're like, oh boy, kid's coming, I better stop, okay? Your drunk driver will look at the ball and say, okay, and what I mean by drunk is impaired on alcohol. They see the ball coming and say, hey, ball, okay, what's coming behind the ball? The kid may be coming behind the ball. They're slowed down. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, slows down the reaction time, then they may break. Your cannabis user, though, okay, sees the ball. They're slowed down as well. Look at the color of the ball.
And when you say slow down, just a second, when you say slow down, you don't mean they're speeding. You don't mean like slowing the car down. You mean their processes, right?
The reaction, their process, and their cognitive ability is slowed down. So they see that ball and their cognitive process is slowed down. They see that ball, it's like, wow, look at the ball. Look at the colors of the ball. Look at the way the ball bounces. And then maybe they decide that they should apply the brake. Okay. It is a true thought process. When we have cannabis drivers stopped on the side of the road, people that we suspect for cannabis, we will make sure that we divide that attention and do things like ask for one thing at a time. Do me a favor, driver, keep your hands on the steering wheel. Can I see your driver's license? As they're looking for the driver's license, then we'll ask them. We see your proof of insurance as well. We look at the processing. Where are you coming from? What time did you leave? What time is it now? Very often we're going to see them look at the clock on their dash and just point at it and go, because they got multiple things going on. The thought process is severely affected. It's a different impairment than you see with alcohol. Trying to articulate that can be very difficult.
So you're not going to expect to see slurred speech and falling down or stumbling around. And that's the problem, is that our judges and our prosecutors and sometimes even our officers don't realize that. So let's talk about what can groups like PLT, our friends that are hosting this today, what can they do? Well, first of all, team up. There's power in numbers. What do you say about that, Dan?
Well, one of the biggest problems that we've gotten, Ed and Erin did a really good job of talking about the way the cannabis industry is targeting our children, our younger people. They've got the money. They have the money. They can put out, advertise, twist things, put things on Google and Yahoo about how great God's flower is and how it treats and cures everything out there. We really need groups like PLT, AIM, MAD, SAD, to get together and work together to get legislation changed. We're dealing with a juggernaut out there. The money, as Ed and Erin talked about earlier, that's being pumped into this makes cannabis look like it truly is a miracle cure for everything. For one group alone to try and go to our legislature and try and combat these lobbyists, it's going to be impossible. You guys got to somehow get together and do this. We need to change things. Like right now, if I were to pull over a subject, let's say I got a 17-year-old that's driving under the influence of alcohol. I've got something called a zero tolerance. They have any amount of alcohol in their system, they're DUI. It's not a criminal DUI in the state of Illinois, but it's an administrative DUI. Right now, if I get that same subject under the influence of cannabis, there is no zero tolerance on them. If they're not 5 and 10 nanograms, this could be very, very difficult to prosecute this case. Our judges out there really want to see a chemical test of 5 and 10 nanograms. They don't just want to see the impairment. So without getting our good quality groups together, like our PLT, our AIMS, MAD, SAD, without getting them together to try and combat these and do some legislative changes, it's going to be hard for one group alone to do it. The legislature made very clear when they went to medical cannabis and then to, and I like what Ed's saying about commercialized versus decriminalized. I've used the term decriminalized. They did a really good job of telling law enforcement, the Illinois Association of Police, our Illinois Traffic Safety Prosecutor, that they didn't want to hear from us. Any of these discussion groups that they put together? Jen, did you guys get invited?
Not at all. In fact, I I was invited as a guest by somebody else who was invited to a forum on it. And they were having like a state legislature or state legislator there. And they wanted the list of guest names. And so the person who had invited me to attend with him, he went ahead and gave them my name because he was going to bring me along. And they said, no, she absolutely cannot come.
Yeah, the Illinois Chiefs were shut out of these discussion panels too. They did not want any dissenting opinions. Ed and Erin would have never gotten anywhere near close to that. Why? Because they know the truth, okay? There are some medical benefits of cannabis out there, but the detrimental side effects to this stuff are just crazy. So they don't want to hear from law enforcement. They think that we are all stuck in the past. And we're not, because if we're stuck in the past, I kind of agree with Ed. 3 to 4% THC. When I arrested people when I first started, they cooperated and did anything I wanted to do. Saturday night, we're in a huge fight with a guy under the influence of cannabis. He's fighting with us like he's on a hallucinogen or a dissociative. The calls we get for people overdosing, meaning they need to go to the hospital. This stuff never happened 15 years ago when it's 3 to 4%. But now that we deal with 30 all the way up to 99% crystalline shatter, it's crazy out there. So without getting all of our groups together on the same page and going to the legislature in a united front, we're not going to get anywhere because they've made it really clear. They do not want to hear from law enforcement because they think we're just anti-cannabis, anti-cannabis, anti-cannabis. Personally, I just want safe roads, and I don't want kids being put in these predicaments or having the problems that they have in Colorado.
For sure. Good summary of that, Dan, and thank you for saying that. So I think really because I want to be cognizant that we want to open this up to the questions and answer session. I mean, really what it boils down to is, this quote that I took from Dr. Karen Randall. This is from a couple of years ago, but she really sums it up best when she talks about what's happened in Colorado. And that is that the legalization of marijuana has damaged rather than helped Colorado. I think the public needs to know we are not okay. The grand experiment is not going so well. And I don't think the public is hearing about this as they should be. That to me sums up everything that we're here to talk about today. Again, I'm sorry that we can't give more information about the youth and arrests, but those things are stuff that we just are not allowed access to. And even like Dan within his own agency, I mean, they're barred from talking about that kind of thing. So just know that, we don't need a crystal ball to tell us what's going to happen. We know from what all our speakers have said and what's happened in every state that has gone down this path, that it is not good and that it's not going to get any better. And we need to push hard to get the information out there and educate as much as we can. And I really appreciate the team today for having us on here to speak. Dan, I don't know if you have any other remarks, but I've got our phone numbers and our email addresses up there. Feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to talk to you more about this kind of stuff.
Thank you, Jennifer and Dan. We do not currently have any unanswered questions in our Q&A. So we do have just a few more slides. I'm going to toss it to my co-chair, Andrew, in just a minute here. I'm going to pull up some local data that we have. So if you do have any questions, just go ahead and put those in the Q&A box and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. And with that, I will throw it to Andrew.
Thank you, Jory. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists for the great insight on the issue. For those that don't know me, I'm Andrew Anselm. I'm with Illinois State Police, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Prevention Leadership Team with Jen. Before we open it up, if there are any questions, I wanted to share a little more data on our local youth and the impacts in DuPage. This slide shows marijuana use rates among DuPage County teens. This data comes from the Illinois Youth Survey, which is given to teens throughout Illinois every other year. This data pertains to the DuPage County teens in 10th and 12th grade and shows youth who reported using marijuana in the past 30 days in 2016, 2018, and 2020. Though it looks like self-reported use declined between 2018 and 2020, a significant percentage of youth in DuPage are still using marijuana. The perception of harm data related to risk associated with marijuana use is also concerning among DuPage County teens. This data again comes from the Illinois Youth Survey. A low perception of harm is often related to a higher likelihood of use. This data shows that a high percentage of teens in DuPage do not associate risk with marijuana use. But as we know, the health and safety risk associated with youth marijuana are high. The skewed perception among youth could be attributed to the marketing tactics used by the industry to tout marijuana as a natural and healthy substance. Looking at these graphs, the calls to poison control related to marijuana ingestions are also on the rise in DuPage County. Most alarmingly, calls regarding children 0 to 5 who have ingested marijuana edibles have increased dramatically between 2017 and 2021. This can be associated with marijuana legalization, making marijuana more prominent in the homes and edibles looking very appealing to young children. Finally, with the recreational marijuana legalization comes recreational marijuana marketing and advertising. The state law is very clear on what is and was not allowed in marijuana advertising. For example, it is false. Advertisements can't be used that are false or misleading. They promote overconsumption of cannabis. Includes the images of cannabis leaf or bud, includes the images of cartoons, toys or animals, or anything else designed to appeal to minors. As you can see from these ads, they appeal directly to youth and are some of the tactics used by, are the same tactics used by tobacco companies and the alcohol industry to engage young people. It is illegal to do that or to have these ads, but there's so many dispensaries and so many ads that it has been hard for law enforcement to enforce these rules. Our coalition will continue to advocate for prevention and for the policies that reduce the impact of marijuana on youth populations. We encourage local communities to take their time to assess the need to expand marijuana businesses further in DuPage and to take in consideration some strong prevention policies to pass before allowing marijuana businesses to operate in your community. For more information on our coalition and our work, you can visit our websites at dupageplt.org or check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Our monthly meetings are posted on our website and are always open to the community to attend. We hope you will be able to join us. Now I'll pass it back over to Jory, the coordinator of the PLT, for any question and answers.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And we do have one question. It seems that we need more scientific studies to address, one, what levels of cannabis are associated with safe functioning, and two, testing that can be performed in real time. And three, are these tests being performed anywhere? So it seems like maybe either Jennifer or Dan Staffy might be the best to answer that question.
Yeah, so go ahead, Dan, you take it. Go ahead.
The real-time testing, I think you're kind of probably referring to oral fluid testing. That was one of the hopes that we were really looking for. We started about 5 years ago testing a lot of different products that were roadside testable for oral fluid testing. And we tested with the DREs, drug recognition experts, with the field certifications that we were doing. The best, nicest thing I could say is it's nowhere near it needs to be right now. Okay, we were hoping it would be, it's just not. All right, we hope that it would work. We would hope we'd have great success. We just didn't see a lot of really good success at this time with it. The only thing that I can go back to saying is well-trained officers are your best bet with getting these people off the roadway. Jen?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Dan. I think we got to stop looking for some sort of scientific test that is going to solve this problem. Every time we think we have one, then the science changes. And, just with Illinois alone, when we not we, but when they passed the nanogram limits, you know, the 5 nanograms that you've been talking about, the only compound they can include in there was delta 9 THC, which I don't want to get too far into that, but we've already heard about delta 8 and we've heard about THCO. So our legislators got it wrong. They narrowed it down too specifically. And now, you know, it's a cat and mouse game with the industry. It's like, oh, okay, they said you can't have this. Well, we'll create this so that you can have this and not get in trouble for it. You know, and that's exactly what's happened. So we've got to get away from looking for some sort of scientific number. There is no correlation between an amount of cannabis you can smoke and be safe, or ingest and be safe, and an amount of alcohol. That's apples and oranges. You see, there's so many products out there. There's so many potency levels. There's so many methods of ingestion. You know, people aren't smoking alcohol typically, right? And alcohol is, when it comes to the type people drink, ethanol alcohol, alcohol is alcohol is alcohol. With cannabis, look at the variety that's out there. So for us to be able to throw a dart at the dartboard and hit the bullseye is just not going to happen. I see, Ed, you're nodding in agreement on that. Do you want to talk about that or expound on that?
No, I just 100% agreement with both of you. I think oral fluid testing right now, as we know, it sucks. I'll be a little more polite. It's nowhere near, and I don't know if it's even when we're going to get there. And I agree that, you know, the science for alcohol impairment is pretty concise. We don't have it for cannabis impairment, what it looks like. And you've already alluded to part of the problem in that. So I'm in 100% agreement. And I think it goes right back to recognizing first that marijuana is going to play an increasing role in on our highways. You know, there's no escaping the fact that people are going to use and drive. And it's the fact that, number one, acknowledging that we don't have the law enforcement resources at the level that we need to. Not everybody's going to be not everybody. I don't want to be a DRE. I ain't smart enough to be a DRE, but we've got to have more. We have to have the mechanism, and it's going back to doing what I've always said all along, that we and as in law enforcement, we got to go back to doing it the right way, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, being able to articulate what impairment looks like at the time you observed it, what led you to make that stop, why did you make that stop, and what after you made that stop led you to believe that that individual was impaired by whatever substance that individual, because impairment's impairment. Doesn't matter what it is. And we got to get back to doing that. And, you know, I think one of the points you touched on, we're not, the fact that they couldn't during COVID is something the industry is going to jump all over with when we see 21 data with respect to the numbers of impaired driving and how across the country in these states are going to go down for the very reason that you all too have already very eloquently touched on. You know, you can't take a whole department down with one chance encounter. So your number, and they're going to jump all over and say, look, we're not having a fact. It's the whole point of understanding the full, holistically, the look at data when you're looking at it. And to say that for the next 2 years, impaired driving's gone down in this country. Well, hell yeah, it's gone down. If you're not stopping people, it's going to go down. Pardon my French. It's just simple as that. And understanding the dynamics around that before you make this off the base assumption that it had nothing to do, cannabis had nothing to do, no influence on impaired driving. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. We're going to have a couple of years of skewed data. And I suspect that when we get back to normal, it's going to go through the roof. So, you know, God bless you both for what you do. We just need at least 2 or 3 of you in every state doing what you're doing. So.
Well, it seems like everybody did a great job covering their content because we do not have any more questions in the Q&A box. So with that, I just want to thank all of our panelists today. We tried to accomplish a lot in just 2 hours. So our coalition, like Andrew shared, will continue to work on this issue. We'll continue to bring in these subject matter experts and offer training and insight into this issue. So please check our website, DuPagePLT.org. All our monthly meetings are on there, as well as upcoming trainings and events. We'll place those on there, and hopefully we can do these in person in the near future as well. Any last minute thoughts from any of our panelists?
No, thanks for everybody for attending and great job by the co-panelists and thank you, Jordan and Andrew and Mila for having us on today. It's great.
Thank you. And we will get this recording posted. I'll send it out to everybody who registered today. We'll also post it on our YouTube page. If you just go on YouTube, DuPage County Prevention Leadership Team, you can find us there, or on our website, it will be posted there. So hopefully before the end of the week, we'll get this edited and sent out to everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Right.